Irreconcilable differences. They're powerful words, said Othet. He scanned them again, shaking his head in admiration. Look those next to you in the eye and tell them you are sacrificing all they have. Ouch. Hamelot made a noise that, while difficult to interpret precisely, left the Stormcrow in no doubt that his old friend did not agree. You don't think it's good? He asked. Hamelot grunted again. Don't get me wrong, old crow, it's not that I don't think it's solid, evocative stuff. She had her own documents out, spread on the table between them. A handful of statements of principle, painstakingly copied and recopied, showing the signs of having been folded and unfolded many times. Some of them had little spots of dried blood on them. Shardbearers are credit to the Senate and to Calavesa. Proud, wise. The words are sensible. I sense a but coming, said Othet. His friend flashed a brief smile, but there was a sadness in it. But Vesna said it was our destiny to unite the world under the way. The world, Othet. Aspar said we have to nurture the fire of virtue that smoulders in the archipelago, that it's our duty to nurture the flame. And they had the synod behind them. The whole General Assembly, Othet. But the war. There will always be war, snapped Hamelot. Then softened slightly. Do not fear to act, only be shamed by inaction. Othet bristled. Don't quote courage to me, Hamelot. I know the tenets better than you do. Is it inaction to judge the time wrong and the risk too great? Assaveya will still be there. The plenum will still be there. The Grendel, beaten back in Madruga, rousted from Marive and Faroz, battered in Areed, interrupted Hamelot. Don't lecture me about the Grendel. And don't dare lecture me about the Druge either. Don't you dare. Othet shut his mouth, biting off the angry words about the Druge he had indeed been about to spit across the table at Hamelot. He subsided, unhappy not just about this argument, but about all the others they'd had over the last 6 months. They knew each other too well to argue like this. The two sat for a minute or so in awkward silence, Stormcrow and Battle Priest, neither prepared to give ground to the other. Then Hamelot let out a great gusty sigh and gave the lopsided shrug that was the closest she ever got to an apology. Know your heart and what commands its devotion above all else, Hamelot spoke quietly, reached across the table to touch his hand as she tried to reach him with her voice. There are people in Assaveya being killed right now for believing in the virtues, believing in us. What happens to them if we just shrug and say, sorry, the Senate said no? What happens to them, Othet? And what does it say about us? It's not that simple, he expostulated, pulling away, slamming his other hand, the metal hand, down on the table. You know it isn't. It's a grand dream, but the cost, and don't you dare tell me that consequences are the price. I know that better than you do, remember? He hadn't meant to throw it in her face, his scars and the loss that lay between them even after all these years. He would have called his hot words back if he could have. But a skein once forked cannot be unforked. Hamelot stood up, knocking her chair to the floor, and stalked out of the room. He half stood himself, intending to call after her, but in the end, his apology died on his lips, and he slumped back into his chair. She didn't return, even though he sat there until the sun settled into the west and the shadows lengthened into night. Overview. The Imperial Senate has passed a motion making it illegal for priests to spread the way in Assaveya. Sabella of the Silent Tide expressed her intention to seek the veto of the Imperial Synod on this motion. During the summer solstice, Rain Shardbearer, the senator for Calavesa, raised a motion making it illegal to preach the way in Asavea. The motion was deeply contentious, but it passed by just a single vote. The throne elected not to veto the motion, but Sabella of the Silent Tide, the Cardinal of Loyalty, indicated to the civil service that she intends to seek the veto in the Imperial Synod. The Imperial Synod has already passed a number of mandates urging missionaries and highborn wayfarers to travel to make contact with virtuous sects and preach the way. Priests in many assemblies raised statements of principle urging pilgrims to support the efforts in the far west, and while many of them failed to achieve a greater majority, enough did to make it clear that there is open conflict between many members of the Synod and many members of the Imperial Senate. The Synod Veto. The law does not come into force until the Synod has had a chance to consider the veto at the coming summit. As this motion was passed on Sunday, the judgment will be raised at the autumn equinox 386 YE. If the veto is successful, the same motion cannot be raised during the autumn equinox. While the motion to enact the law criminalizing the preaching of the way in Asavea has been passed, the expressed intention to seek the veto means that it is held in abeyance. Until the matter is resolved, the law is not put into practice. Chief Magistrate Stanislav Karkovich has prepared some guidance and expects the law itself to be reasonably straightforward. If the law passes, then it will be a crime to preach the way anywhere in the Asavean archipelago, and it will likewise be a criminal act to encourage, solicit, or help with the preparation of Asavean preaching, meaning that not only would it be illegal for imperial citizens to preach directly, it would be illegal for them to assist anyone else in preaching the way in Asavea. According to imperial law, the Senate motion cannot be enacted until the Synod has had a chance to consider whether they wish to veto the new law. The decision to seek the veto has delayed the introduction of the new law by a season, allowing priests to continue to preach the way in Asavea, but it is only delayed by a single season. The issue must be settled at the forthcoming summit. Either the Synod veto the decision, or they allow the new law to come into force. Because the Senate motion creating the law was not a constitutional matter, only the General Assembly can veto the motion, and it must have a greater majority in favour. That means that the veto will only happen if the majority of the priests present in Anvil vote in favour of it. The judgment will be available for voting by all members of the General Assembly starting on the Friday evening and will close at 10 p.m. on Saturday. Sabella of the Silent Tide may choose to request closure of the judgment early if it achieves a greater majority before then. If the veto is successful, then the Senate will not be able to pass another motion which is the legal equivalent again during the autumn equinox. They may pass a motion on the same issue, provided that it contains substantive legal differences to the motion that was vetoed. This assessment is made by scrutiny by the Constitutional Court, who have a reputation for respecting the expressed wishes of the Synod in this matter. There is nothing to stop the Senate raising the motion to criminalize preaching again at the winter solstice, but obviously the Synod would again be able to seek the veto. Regardless of whether it is successful or not, the Synod will be able to seek another veto in the General Assembly during the summit. This is because vetoing the motion used a priest's judgment from last event, even though thanks to the timing the actual vote is taking place during the autumn equinox. While resolving the matter of the veto is key, neither its success nor failure will conclusively end the matter. There are any number of other things to consider as well. The weight of the war. The Empire and the Asavean Republic are at war. Strengthening the way in Asavea is seen as an existential threat by the Asavean plenum. Even before the Synod urged missionaries to visit the archipelago, the plenum had given aid to the Grendel, using them as agents in a proxy war against the Empire. They sought retribution for the Shaloncio and recompense for what they saw as years of slights, disrespect, and imperial meddling. Since the missionaries have been travelling to Asavea, however, the plenum has redoubled its efforts in the Empire's sphere of influence. They have sent additional warships to bolster the Grendel navies, placed a bounty on everyone trading with the Empire, launched a surprise attack on Mead, the far side of the Empire from the Bay of Katazar, and allegedly sent assassin priests of the twin gods of vengeance and ambition to hunt imperial citizens. The plenum clearly see the presence of missionaries in such numbers, openly pushing the way, as an existential threat to themselves and their whole way of life. They simply cannot afford the way to empower their large slave class with its drive to ambition and courage, nor allow a religion that decries their complex pantheon of temples and gods as idolatry. If the veto succeeds, it is certain the Asaveans will continue to increase their efforts. More support for the Grendel, more diplomats and spies in Farad'n and the other small nations, more resources for the Empire's enemies. The war against the Sumar Republic raging in the Sea of Salt, which Imperial citizens are already involved in, may be the only thing preventing them from providing even more significant aid to their Grendel allies in their fight against the Empire. Actual peace with Asavea seems unlikely at the moment. There have been too many terrible deeds done on both sides. But if the veto succeeds and the missionaries continue, it will stoke the fires of Asavean fury further. If the veto fails, however, there is no doubt that the Asaveans will ruthlessly crush the virtuous sects in their lands that have been empowered by the Synod and drive the way back underground for years to come. A difficult balance, and one that may prove impossible to level. Virtuous voices. 2 mandates were enacted following the summer solstice that will be directly affected by the new law if it comes to pass. The General Assembly recognised one of the ringleaders of the Marilyn Rebellion in Asavea as an exemplar. Imperial citizens can now provide resources directly to the virtuous sects in Asavea to help them build their faith and spread the way. Freeborn captains have taken the lead on smuggling priests and material into the archipelago under the noses of the plenum. While the Imperial Senate was discussing whether to take the contentious step of making preaching in Asavea illegal, the Imperial Synod made significant choices of its own. 2 major mandates were passed with immediate effect. Aspar enacted a mandate urging Imperial citizens to provide the pilgrims of Asavea, whoever they may be, with white granite to help them establish shrines and meeting places, both in secret and more openly in places where the gaze of the plenum and the Asavean priesthoods do not reach. In addition to stone, large amounts of money will be needed to provide other building materials and to pay captains to get both to Asavea under the noses of their government. As a consequence of this mandate, a special commission has been established that any Imperial citizen can contribute white granite and money to. Once the Anchor the Way project is complete, it will establish the Way as a credible threat to the status quo in Asavea. There is no guarantee it will be able to overthrow the plenum or the stranglehold the priesthood has over the populace, but it will create a foundation that will help them build toward those outcomes. It will also lead to further opportunities to support the pilgrims of the way, further opportunities to invest, and further opportunities to achieve the ambition of bringing the way to Asavea. Provided it remains legal to support the way in Asavea, of course. If it is illegal to preach the way in Asavea, it is also illegal to support the preaching of the way. Not only the plenum, but imperial law will also need to be flouted to provide materials, and at any time the wains or funds might be impounded by the magistrates. If the ban comes into effect, then other, more costly avenues will need to be found if imperial citizens wish to break the law and continue to provide materials to the sects in Asavea. The immediate effect will be that the commission will be shut down, and there is no guarantee it will be made available again. All the liao spent on the mandate and the materials contributed so far will be wasted. At the same time, however, Pacheco Ishatha Iguera received the support of the Freeborn National Assembly to enact a mandate urging the ship captains of the Brass Coast to ensure the aid offered to the people of Asavea reaches their shores. Immediately after the summer solstice, it became possible for freeborn fleets to undertake the Smuggle the Way to Asavea adventure. The skill of the freeborn captains ensures that wherever possible, missionaries and contributions to the Asavean sects arrive safely, ready to avoid the plenum and the Asavean priesthood. If the veto is unsuccessful and the new law is enacted, then this opportunity will be lost. It is not possible for freeborn vessels to reach Asavea without the knowledge of the civil service, who are duty-bound to report illegal behavior to the proper authorities. This is, after all, the basis whereby the Empire ensures that pirates do not destroy its international reputation. The same applies to smuggling. The adventure will be lost if it is illegal to preach in Asavea. Finally, the General Assembly chose to recognize as an exemplar one of the Asavean followers of the Way responsible for inciting a rebellion among the slaves of Maracosa. This is a potent step in helping spread the faith in Asavea. It is one thing to be told of foreign exemplars, and quite another to hear the inspiration of exemplars born in your own nation. Spreading those tales, however, is de facto preaching the Way. Doing so would be a crime if the law passes. There is another complication here, of course. The looming crisis surrounding revelations about Vardas means that the role of exemplars in the Way is under question, as detailed in the True Faith Wind of Fortune. Until the matter of the law is settled and the crisis is resolved one way or another, there are no current opportunities to make use of this decision. Doubling down. Lutobor Branislavovich Glinka enacted a mandate for the General Assembly urging the virtuous to focus their efforts on bringing the Way to Asavea. While citizens focus on supporting the missionaries, it becomes much more difficult to encourage them to engage in missionary work elsewhere. If the Synod abandons its efforts in Asavea, it will be impossible to urge missionaries to seek converts anywhere else for at least 3 years. While Chief Magistrate Karkovich thinks the matter of the law is straightforward, there is a further complication. During the summer solstice, Lutobor Branislavovich Glinka enacted a mandate supported by the General Assembly, urging every imperial citizen to assist Asavean followers of the Way to spread the faith. A further 150 liao were used. The mandate itself was a response to discussions about whether to go further than Asavea, to spread the Way to every nation of the world. Instead, the Synod has chosen to double down on establishing the Way in Asavea, a bold decision in light of the opposition of the Imperial Senate. The mandate has made sure that every follower of the Way in the Empire, and many in other nations, have heard of the conflict between the two houses of power, and many of them are taking a side. At the time the mandate was passed, it wasn't clear what effect it would have beyond those already enacted by Athiel Westerborn of the Cenotaph and Derwin Tendfallen, and Melchior of Adina's charge in winter last year, or the numerous statements of principle in spring, or the other mandates enacted in summer. As the summit approaches, the first effects become more apparent. During the autumn equinox, citizens of nearly every nation will be looking to their National Assembly for guidance about what to do as a consequence of the conflict between Synod and Senate. Any statement of principle in a National Assembly that seeks to guide the people with regards to encouraging preaching in Asavea or opposing the wishes of the Senate will receive additional attention. Such a statement is significantly more likely to result in a mandate or other effect. It will be read widely, and any effect it does have is likely to be more dramatic. The exception is Verushka and Urizen. The mandate enacted by Lutibor Branislavovich Glinka, themselves paradoxically Verushkin, did not achieve a greater majority, so has had no particular impact in those nations. More importantly, this decision to double down on preaching in Asavea has sent a clear message to the people of the Empire that this, here, right now, is important. Regardless of whether the synod veto is achieved or not, there will be little interest in preaching the way anywhere other than Asavea, at least until the followers of the faith are free to practice their religion openly. Regardless of whether the synod veto is achieved or not, there will be little interest in preaching the way anywhere other than Asavea, at least until the followers of the faith are free to practice their religion openly. If the synod tries to back away from preaching in Asavea, if it gives up its commitment to support the followers of the faith there, then the people of the Empire will understand, but there will be no further opportunity to perform widespread missionary work on this kind of scale for at least 3 years, likely longer. Finally, a further 150 liao in the face of the Senate's opposition means that the virtuous will listen to their hearts. Even if it is a crime to preach in Asavea, there will be plenty of pilgrims in the Empire who will look for opportunities to continue doing so, as long as the priests of the synod continue to support them. While those priests enacting mandates encouraging the spread of the way in Asavea will face the full weight of the law, their words will still be listened to. The way, after all, tells the virtuous to listen to their hearts and not to allow doubts or opposition to sway them from their path. Loyalty. The Assembly of Loyalty have urged all the virtue assemblies to support the expansion of the way in Asavea. The loyal are biding their time to see what happens with the veto before presenting opportunities. On top of the mandate enacted by the General Assembly, the Assembly of Loyalty elected to send Dagon of Highguard, the former champion of loyalty, to spread a mandate urging their fellow assemblies to do what they can to help spread the way to Asavea. The mandate has further encouraged imperial citizens to find other ways to support the virtuous rebels in Asavea, with members of the various assemblies seeking opportunities to find new ways to help with the efforts. For the loyal, for those who listen to the voice of their heart and feel that their path lies with the missionaries going to Asavea, or those unable to practice their faith openly, the question of legality is not a concern. No opportunities have been presented at the autumn equinox because the loyal are waiting to see what happens. The kind of proposals that arise from a mandate such as Dagon's will be very different depending on whether it is legal to preach in Asavea or whether doing so is a crime. So until the situation is resolved one way or another, the virtuous are biding their time. Regardless, though, there will be opportunities in winter to support the Asavean pilgrims and the missionaries aiding them, one way or another. The Sevenfold Path. At the urging of the conclave, magicians of the Sevenfold Path have gone to Asavea to seek out virtuous magicians who follow the way. The magicians are expected to make a full report before the winter solstice. As well as missionaries and those supporting them, a third group of imperial citizens are travelling to the hostile shores of the Asavean archipelago. The imperial conclave supported the Declaration of Concord raised by Grand Master Raphael Barossa d'Apulian that guided the order to go to Asavea and make contact with Axiai-inspired Wayist sects there. The Concord pointed out that the plenum are looking for priests, not magicians, but of course the plenum are also looking for imperial citizens, thanks to the fact they are at war with the Empire. There is no certainty of safety for any of those who have chosen to venture to Asavea. The journey is dangerous, as is seeking allies in a country that both suppresses the religion of those sought and has no qualms about executing imperial citizens caught within their borders as spies. Exactly how many magicians have answered the Grand Master's call is not clear. Most have reached Asavea with the aid of freeborn corsairs, who have guaranteed their safe arrival, but can do little to aid them once they are there. A number have made it their goal to find sects inspired by the Marilyn Rebellion and the deeds of the Axii. Others have spread out to the far corners of the archipelago, the better to ensure that a single successful raid by the authorities does not put a stop to their efforts before they begin. Word struggles to get out of Asavea, and it will take at least another season before a true sense of the success of the Sevenfold Path enterprise can be garnered. A few details are apparent, however. The practice of magic is not as widespread in the archipelago as it is in the Empire, and much of it is tied up with the temples of the Asavean gods. The priests of the nameless god of magic in particular exert a lot of influence over the magicians of Asavea, and most pay at least lip service to its temples. In return, they find it easier to acquire magical resources, expand their magical lore, and meet others who share their interest in the magical arts. Most of the practicing ritual magicians of power are part of the plenum caste of Asavean society, and thus have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Most, but not all. There have been rumours for the past few months that one of the plenum families, the Cerularios, are secretly devout dedicates of the path of prosperity. They don't seem to have much awareness of the way as a whole, and it's unclear where they gained their appreciation of that particular virtue from, but by all accounts they quietly practice Liao ceremonies and are insulated from any backlash both by their position and their caution. If not for the interest Catella Cerularios has shown in the relic Glistering, one of the artifact pilgrim's shields, and the loose lips of some Biorev mercenaries, the Empire would also be none the wiser. As well as their focused religious beliefs, the Cerularios are apparently also competent magicians versed in autumn magic, whose reputation suggests they may be some of the most accomplished in Asavea at this time. Some of the Sevenfold Path are trying to make contact, but they have managed to get word back to the Conclave that if the opportunity presents itself, a discussion with the mercenary captain Catella may prove illuminating, or a disaster. One matter that it is worth noting is that regardless of what happens with the veto and the Senate, the Sevenfold Path are not preaching the way in Asavea. At the moment, their mission is to find virtuous magicians, and so will not be impacted either way. If the law passes, however, it is likely to limit what they can achieve going forward. Speaking to those already dedicated is not a crime, but encouraging them to spread the way might be. Conflict. When role-playing conflict, you must abide by our conduct rules. The matter of the veto can always be contentious. It represents a direct clash between two of the ruling houses of the Empire, between the Senate and the Synod. It's likely that tempers may run hot as people discuss the issues raised, but any disagreements must remain in character. It's always worth refreshing your memory of our rules around role-playing conflict, and now is as good a time as any to take another look at the conduct rules.